Good evening, everybody. Polar just got her bath. She's not the most happy with me. She doesn't like her bath. But we're on chapter 8 of the book, and let's get started. If I don't watch out, I'll get to the end of the story without telling you how little Jim killed the bear. But I have to explain all these other things first because they're what's called the setting of the story. Also, I'll have to tell you something about Bob and Tom Till because they're in the story too, especially Tom. Because besides, the bear isn't the only important thing in this book, not by a long shot. Bob was 14 years old and bigger than Big Jim. He had even shaved once or twice. Tom had red hair like mine and was as mean as anything. The first time we saw the boys was one day about a week after my dad fired their dad for giving whiskey to Circus's dad. Our gang had been in swimming and having a great time. We were out dressing in the shade of a big peach leaf willow when we heard somebody laughing up in the woods. Well, after swimming, we'd planned on going up on the hill near the big rock, where we knew there were a lot of ripe, wild strawberries just waiting for hungry boys to come and pick them. We'd been the only boys in our neighborhood for a long time, and it seemed the strawberries and the creek and all the woods belonged to us. The fact is, they belonged to Old Man Paddler, and he'd given us permission to pick berries or do anything else we wanted to there. "It's the Till boys," Dragonfly said. "They're up there eating our strawberries." We finished dressing in a hurry and started on the run through the woods. Then we sneaked up behind some bushes and watched them. But there weren't only the two Till boys. There were 4 or 5 other boys who lived in town and belonged to the same tough gang the Till boys had belonged to before moving into the country. They were gobbling up our strawberries as fast as they could and laughing and hollering and swearing and saying many things that none of our gang ever said because Big Jim wouldn't stand for it and because it was wrong. I think it was their swearing that made us disgusted more than the fact that they were eating our strawberries. They were all barefoot, but none of them looked like the boy in the poem we learned at school that says, "Blessings on thee, little man, barefoot boy with cheeks of tan, with thy lips redder still, kissed by strawberries on the hill." None of our gang felt like a poem either. We just lay there watching with our tempers like fuses burning shorter and shorter toward a half-dozen sticks of dynamite, each one expecting to explode any minute. Little Jim's fists were doubled up because he couldn't stand to hear anybody swear. And before any of us knew what he was going to do, he darted out into the open and yelled, "You boys, stop that swearing!" And then he ducked into the bushes and crouched down beside Big Jim. Well, that started their fuses burning too. There wasn't any use to stay hidden, so Big Jim gave the signal and we all stepped out to where they could see us. And as soon as they saw us, they knew who we were. I guess nearly everybody in the whole county had heard about us. There wasn't a one of us who didn't think we could lick those boys, but Big Jim didn't want us to fight unless we had to. He had his hat pulled down low over one eye and looked pretty fierce. I could see he had his eye on the biggest Till boy and figuring about how easy it would be to lick him. Getting ready to fight is a funny thing. You feel scared and angry at the same time, and yet you really aren't scared, and you can't even see straight for wanting to punch the other fellow's nose. As I said, they knew who we were and didn't like us. You see, when a boy gets about half grown up and doesn't go to Sunday school or church, he thinks every boy who does go is a sissy. Well, the Till's boys' dad must have seen us having that meeting under the elderberry bushes because the smallest one called out to us, "Hello there, you prayer meeting sissies." I felt sorry for those boys being so ignorant, but just the same, it didn't feel very good to be called that. I could tell that my fuse was just about burned to the end. "We're not sissies," Dragonfly shouted back. I looked at Poetry to see how he felt, and his face was as red as a beet. "Those are our strawberries," he yelled. "Oh, they are they?" Big Bob Till called back. "If they are, why don't you come and get 'em?" Then he said sarcastically, "We extend to you a cordial invitation to come up and help yourselves, or maybe you believe in praying for them." We all waited for Big Jim to decide what to do. I'd already decided which one of the boys I was going to fight if I had to. Pretty soon, Big Jim said to us, "You boys wait here a minute." Then he stepped out and marched right up the hill toward them. He said, "Fellows, it isn't a question of whether we're afraid to fight." He was so angry his voice was shaking, and I knew he was just itching to sock that big bully in the jaw. Instead, he made the grandest speech. "There isn't a man among us that's got a drop of coward's blood in him, but the Sugar Creek Gang doesn't believe in fighting, and we won't unless we have to. We have permission from the owner of the woods to pick strawberries here, and we ask if you will please leave and not make it necessary for us to use force." That, I said to myself, is self-control. The kind of self-control Bill Collins needs. I felt proud of Big Jim. But Bob Till just looked disgusted. "You're a bunch of Sunday school and prayer meeting sissies," he shouted. "You're afraid to fight." He took a step toward Big Jim with his fists doubled up, and then he turned to his gang and said, "Come on, gang, let's lick the daylights out of them." And just like a swarm of angry bumblebees, the town boys charged down the hill at us, with their fists flying and their mouths spilling nasty words, calling us all kinds of filthy names. Now I ask you, what's a fellow to do when he knows he shouldn't fight, but when the other fellow needs a licking more than he needs anything else? When I'd need a spanking and my dad gave me one, it had done me good. So I made up my mind, quick as lightning flash, that since that mean-faced, red-haired Till boy, who was just about my size, needed a licking, I was going to give it to him. That's all the thinking I got to do, because when you're in a fight, you can't think very well. But I'm telling you, it was a real battle, and while we were in it, it seemed more important than Waterloo or Gettysburg or any other famous battle. The first thing I knew, that little red-haired kid smacked me on the side of the nose and made me grunt. And that was the last of my fuse. Also, that's when hoeing potatoes and doing a lot of hard farm work comes in handy. My muscles felt like a blacksmith's whose smithy stood under the spreading chestnut tree. It was little Jim who surprised us the most. Once between blows, I saw him down on top of another little fellow. He had the kid by the wrists and was yelling into his face, "Don't you know it's wrong to swear? And don't you know Jesus is your best friend?" I thought little Jim had just yelled down into that boy's face the best sermon he'd ever heard. Just then I made a quick dive for Tom Till's knees, and he went down like a tackled football player. Poetry and the boy he was fighting stumbled over us and came down on us, kersquash, with Poetry on top of the pile, our arms and legs getting all tangled up. If anybody had just seen us then, he couldn't have told which of us was which of those 8 dirty bare feet belonged to who. Getting hit doesn't hurt much when you're in a fight, and I didn't know I had a black eye until afterwards. I thought the reason I couldn't see very well was that I was mad. Poetry was fighting as if he enjoyed it. All of a sudden I heard him quoting a poem about a village blacksmith. It was a poem we'd learned in the school. He had his man down and was sitting on him yelling, "Under a spreading chestnut tree the village smithy stands. The smith a mighty man is he, with large and sinewy hands, and the muscles of his brawny arms as strong as iron bands." And just then Poetry yelled out, "And he goes on Sunday to the church." He said it over and over. "He goes on Sunday to the church. He goes on Sunday to the church." Every time he gave his man another blow, he said, "He goes on Sunday to the church." There wasn't a one of our gang that was ashamed of going to church. We knew that if anybody is a sissy, it's the boy who's afraid to go to church for fear someone will make fun of him. Don't think it was easy to lick those boys, however. Their muscles were as strong as iron bands, too, and some of them had had boxing lessons. Dragonfly seemed to be having the hardest time. I looked around once, just in time to see somebody's long arm reach out and a big fist strike him right in the nose. And that was the last of Dragonfly's fuse, too. After that, he was a little wildcat. And from then on, the Sugar Creek Gang began to make short work of those fellows. I guess Bob Till had never been licked in his life until that day. But then he'd always been a bully and had probably picked on boys smaller than he was. So when our big Jim fought a skillful boxing fight, as cool as a cucumber, and licked the stuffings out of him, it was maybe the best thing that had ever happened to him. And then I heard something buzz around my head and felt a sharp pain in my arm and over my good eye. Somebody had stirred up a bumblebee's nest. In a jiffy, the air was full of black and yellow bumblebees that were even madder than we were. Those big black and yellow buzzers came storming out of their nests like soldiers out of their dugouts, and before we knew it, we were all running to the woods as fast as we could. The fight was over. The thing to do if a bee is after you is to run fast, then suddenly drop to the ground and lie still. That'll lose the bee. He'll go around in circles above you, and if you wait long enough without moving, he'll go away. But we didn't start running soon enough. My eye began to swell right away, and before I went to bed that night, both eyes were so swollen I could hardly see a thing. That didn't end our troubles with the Till boys, even though it was the end of the fight. That fall, we would all have to go to the same little red brick schoolhouse together. Chapter 9. The first thing I did when I got home was to slip into our bathroom and lock the door and take a good look at myself in the mirror. Or perhaps I should say a bad look. I certainly was a sight. I think I actually looked meaner than the little red-haired, mean-faced Till boy. I didn't like to have my parents see me like that, but of course they did. I washed my hands and face carefully and combed my hair. But when I came out of the bathroom, Mom, who was fixing supper, gasped and said, "What on earth?" I hated to mention the fight, so I said, trying to be indifferent, "Oh, I just got too close to a bumblebee who didn't like me very well." I knew that before long I'd have to tell her about the fight, though. Mom stood there with a tea kettle in one hand and a potato peeler in the other, and with a look of astonishment all over her face. She said, "It certainly looks like you got too close to 2 bumblebees," but there was a twinkle in her eye. She knew boys pretty well and was used to having me come home with a sore toe or a torn shirt or a new bump on my head where I'd fallen down somewhere. She turned around and poured water out of the tea kettle into something she was cooking. Then she said, using the same tone of voice I'd been using, "What were you trying to do? Use the bumblebees for binoculars?" She didn't scold me for getting stung. She figured maybe I couldn't help it. Besides, getting stung and having your eye swell up almost shut is enough punishment. I certainly would know enough to be careful next time without being told. I went in to see Charlotte Ann, who was getting cuter every day and who had the sweetest smile. We'd do almost anything to get her to smile, such as tickling her under the chin or touching her pink toes or making funny faces. Sometimes she wouldn't smile, but would just lie there with her big blue eyes wide open and look innocent. Then her little arms and legs would start going like 4 windmills, and she would coo and act awfully smart. Well, when I came in with my swollen eyes, she started smiling right away. "How do you like your big, ugly-faced brother?" I asked her, and those 4 windmills started going. She looked as if she was so happy she could talk, only she couldn't. I picked her up carefully as Mom had taught me to do and held her a while, being especially careful to hold her little head so it wouldn't bob around too much. Then we went and stood in front of the big mirror in Mom and Dad's bedroom. She was a great little sister. Something in me just bubbled up like water does down in the spring, and I kissed the top of her curly black head and called her Charlie and said, "We're going to be pals when you grow up, aren't we?" The bubbling kept right on going inside of me. Oh, I can tell you she was wonderful, great, astonishing, perfectly super. I put Charlie down in her crib, went out to the kitchen and gave Mom a hug, went galloping out of the doors yelling, "Whoopee!" forgetting all about my swollen eyes, except I couldn't see very well. And I started helping Dad with the chores. We're going to stop right there and we'll pick up later.